welcome, William, and
thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us all here this evening. It's really appreciated. William, I suppose really, you need very little introduction. I mean, you have been really a stalwart of the sector for such a long time now, and highly respected contributor, of course. And I mean, we can share the accolades in the sense of you're very much a distinguished fellow of the British Horse Society. You're a coach, you're a breeder, an author, and indeed an inventor. But I think really, what is most evident about you, William, is that you are passionate about education. And I think it is also clear to me that as well as that, you're also very passionate about the welfare of the horse. So those are two things that come across very clear to me in my experience of listening to you over the years. And the topic for this evening's webinar is the handling and the early training of young stock from the ground. And as always, we would love indeed to get the questions from our audience here this evening. And, those questions can be submitted using the Q&A button that is usually found at the bottom of people's screen. So please use the Q&A button rather than the chat button. The chat button should be disabled here this evening. And I suppose before we get started into the meat and bones of this evening's conversation, I would like to emphasize at the outset in this particular topic that safety in all of our actions around and with horses is really of absolute paramount importance. I can't emphasize that enough. And although this discussion is indeed intended as an insight into William's own experience and, your own approach, I suppose, when working with youngsters, this is not intended as an instruction manual as such. This is a conversation about the tips, hints and advice that can be offered around this subject. And I suppose just also to kind of really emphasize to people as well that it's a good idea to have some help around you when working with youngsters. And, at the very least, somebody that is there that can be there if something goes wrong and give a shout to. I think that's really important to put out there at the outset. And I think also, to acknowledge that not every horse and pony is the same. They are individuals and people need to be able to assess that situation and adapt a training program to it. It's also, I think, really important to sort of say to people as well that, you need to be able to acknowledge when it is actually the wiser step to hand over to somebody else that has the skill and has the knowledge if that needs be. So, William, with those few words said from my part, are there any other kind of, I suppose, introductory comments that you would like to make before we get into the business of the meat and bones of the exercise this evening?
Yes, there is, Wendy. First of all, a big shout out to you, because this wouldn't have got off the ground without your diligence and enthusiasm, and that makes a big difference. And I also wanted to give a big thank you to my friend John Slazenger, who did some filming for me of a genuine 3-year-old owned by Katie Goff. And if there's one thing I'd like to add, it's that I wish I could have had another daughter, 16 or 17-year-old, because I would buy her 3-year-old, because it's the type of mare that will go a long, long way. And as regards young horse training, that's why it's so important to try and do things very well to this stage of 3 years of age, so that you allow them to fulfill their potential. Now, I've been lucky enough to have had a number of horses to go from this stage that are bred to the Olympics, but it's the early work which allows them to go to a high level. And I think this 3-year-old mare, which you will see, she's by Chill Out, has a real future. And then the last thing I wanted to say was to echo what you said. It's my particular method, and I'm honoured that so many people wanted to tune in tonight. And I particularly wanted to say hello to Hugh Leonard, one of Ireland's leading horsemen, who I know is tuned in, and he will probably be able to add some tips himself to what I do. But let's see what I do.
Indeed, indeed. Now, I'm just going to get this PowerPoint sharing, and I would also like to extend my my thanks to Mr. Slazenger for his input in preparing for this evening. Because there's some very useful videos in this. And I suppose I'm going to give the floor over to you in a video sense to start with, just to open up. And just to say to our participants here this evening, this video is 4 minutes in duration. Do bear with it, because I think there's some very salient points made to open up the conversation here this evening. So, William, you can just give me a nod.
Hello
that you
to
can
you
see
all.
and hear it okay.
It's really great to talk about young horses, because I love working young horses and it can be extremely rewarding. But I would start off by saying that people are more important than horses, and it's vital that we do everything we can to stay safe. That's why we need to learn these techniques. I look upon it as horses being like children, and you must remember, you are the parent, you are the boss. And a yearling horse is like a 4-year-old child, and a 2-year-old is like an 8-year-old child, and a 3-year-old is like a 15 or 16-year-old child. And you are the parent. Gradually it becomes easier and easier to work the horses, but you have to start them off in the good way. This is a genuine horse's skull, and I'm just going to separate the top jaw from the bottom jaw for a very important reason, and that is to show how much wider the top jaw is than the bottom jaw. And this happens with all horses. They're designed that way so they do a rotational mastication. But what it does mean is that when we put the two jaws back together again, you can see how obvious it is that the top jaw protrudes out over the bottom jaw, and so you have this edge here which causes a problem with tight nosebands and cavesons, lunge cavesons that are put in that position. And on top of that, through here where you have that little marked hole, and it comes from both sides, that is the exit point for the infraorbital nerve. So it comes out here, and any pressure on these nerves, what it does is cause numbness around the area where you actually have the bit, the lower part of the face. So by putting pressure with a tight noseband or a tight caveson, you're actually numbing the area where you have the bit. So that is not helpful. Now, the Micklem bridle avoids the problem of the wider jaw and avoids the problem totally of putting pressure on the infraorbital nerves. What we need to remember as regards putting a bit in a horse's mouth and putting any pressure on the horse's tongue is that the tongue sits on the bars of the mouth. The tongue is wider than the bars of the mouth, and the bars themselves are like little blades. So any excessive pressure means that you're putting the tongue against that sharp area. The horse will be uncomfortable. So there should not be excessive pressure. One thing I do to avoid this is use a little clip on my bridle. So I clip the bit in a very simple fashion, direct to the noseband. So if there is a lot of pull on the ring from the rein, or the horse suddenly throws its head up, there is a direct connection from the bit through to the nose. So therefore the pressure goes not on the tongue and the bars of the mouth, but on the nose itself. So what bit do I use? For the vast majority of horses, I use a simple plain Egbert snaffle that's about ½ an inch wider, left to right, right to left, of the horse's mouth, and it has a slight curve in it. I find that an Egbert snaffle is superior to a loose ring snaffle because you don't get any pinching at the side of the mouth. Now the bit that we've just been using on the 3-year-old is very similar. It's a D snaffle, so it's a little straighter on the outside, and it has a lozenge in the middle. It's just, it's very similar, but it's just probably a tiny bit more comfortable for the horse. So here we have the clip attached, so any pull on the rein here on the bit will go direct through to the horse's nose. So I use that to start with, and it's invaluable to stop any bad problems with the tongue. Or if I have a horse that has had a problem with the tongue, then I will, I'm trying to get it above the bit, I will use those clips.
So that was our starting introduction, and I suppose, William, you know, the welfare of the animal, I mean, you know, one part of that absolutely is that we have correctly fitting tack, that it's comfortable and that it's not causing pain or discomfort. In your experience, you know, and it's a very wide experience looking at a lot of different levels, pony club, the whole way through, all the way up to elite riders. How common is it, in your experience, for rideability issues to have their origins in poorly fitting or inappropriate tack?
It's a huge issue, absolutely huge. And it's something that Ireland in the future should become known for, and that is producing the horses so they don't have mouth problems. A number of years ago, the flash noseband was called in the FEI rules the Irish noseband. Now, it's no longer called that and should be long gone. But we could get a reputation for producing horses better than anyone else. And I'm not just talking about physically, but also mentally. So we have many advantages in Ireland with our space and with our culture, with our attitude to horses. And that's what we should sell. And very much part of that is that we use humane tack. We don't want complication. We want simplicity. And the FEI, when they approved my Micklem bridle for use in competition, they said in their summing up that it was a more humane alternative to what was available. So that's what it's all about.
And there was actually a question that came in before this evening from a lady who has a 3-year-old, that's a rising 3-year-old in July this year. The mare hasn't been bitted previously, can be known to be sensitive around her head, and she anticipates that potentially might be sensitive in her mouth. The plan is to have the mare's teeth checked initially as a first protocol, which I think is very wise, and to then move on using a D-ring egg-butt barrel jointed snaffle, and then follow on with the Micklem bridle and move on then to lunging and all the rest.
Out of interest,
I just, you know, on that point of what you're saying, whether that's a good way to go, I guess, you know, what are your tips also for dealing with the animal that is that bit head shy, or those that are that bit more sensitive in their mouth?
Well, first of all, this very 3-year-old, when she arrived, one of the first things I did was to look in the mouth, and she had a wolf tooth, a nasty one, and a crown cap, which is where the baby tooth gets caught on top of the permanent tooth coming through. So those teeth issues had to be dealt with first, and Aoife Quigley, wonderful equine dentist, did that. And then we had to I gave the mare a couple of weeks doing nothing while that healed up and got comfortable, and then I started. Now, when we talk about head issues, most of the head issues are in fact around a horse having a problem in the past at the top of its head or behind the ears. Behind the ears is just as sensitive as the top of the head, and that when the trigeminal nerve gets damaged, often because a horse has been in a head collar and pulled back, they then suffer pain there. They don't associate it with the tying up, they associate it with anybody touching that part of the horse's head. Excuse me. And they become head shy. As regards the mouth, I honestly say that apart from horses that are spoilt, it is very, very, very rare to get mouth problems if you start off with a simple, well-fitted bit like this, and you make sure that you don't put any undue pressure on the bit. So I know people do things in different ways, but I do not lunge off the bit. And I'm very careful what I do early on with how much pressure is put on the bit.
Yeah. And your tip around the wee clip there is actually quite ingenious.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we'll move on to this clip, and I'm going to just kill the sound of this. We had some sound issues with this clip. So William, you're just going to talk us through your thought, what you had in mind.
The horses should be pleased to see you. So when you go into the field, you don't want them scurrying away. They should be pleased to see you. And I think it's very important that the youngsters get a chance to socialize. A good part of the training is done for you if you put a horse in a group of horses, because they develop a pecking order. And when they develop that pecking order, they get used to the fact that a horse, or in the future a human, can lead the way. I find youngsters that have never had this socialization, have never been with other horses, they find it much more difficult early on. So all the horses should be pleased to see you. But a word of warning, you know, I go into the field, I handle the youngsters in the field, but it can be very dangerous if you have a big group of young horses, and it can be very dangerous if they're all stirred up. So you don't want to get into a difficult situation. I think it was Tommy Stack who was kicked in the head in the field. So you have to be very careful. So I'm very careful here. This is a yearling by Gamut out of a puissance mare. the yearling took probably 3 times as long for every little stage. So instead of a week, it was 3 weeks before she really got happy with humans. And then after this winter, when I hadn't handled them so much, when I started handling her again, it took a little longer. On the right, you have a 2-year-old, but I'm talking to the camera here. That is actually losing concentration on the 2 horses. Normally I'd be facing the 2 horses. So I'm putting myself in a slightly difficult situation. I'll explain again how to pick up a foreleg, but the farrier comes to all my youngsters in the field. I can pick up every single leg. Normally I have them held while they're doing it, but they get used to that from an early stage. There's no point to have fighting. And as I just said about the damaging the nerves on the top of the head or behind the ears, too many horses are tied up and struggle, and that's something I try and avoid. You see me changing hands as I change sides, and this is very important to be able to use both hands. So if I'm on the left-hand side, my left hand is holding the horse, my right hand is doing things, and vice versa. And you'll see in everything that I do, I try and do things from both sides, and that includes jumping. It's a major problem. We do too much on the left rein, both in lunging and in jumping. But you can see how this 2-year-old is very happy to have my company here. And once you can build up that trust, at this stage, it's very easy to progress. But I think in the film clips coming up, I'm going to show you what I would do with a horse that hasn't been handled before, or handled very little, or is a little wild.
And I suppose just, obviously you were able to walk out into the paddock there, and, the animals had no head collars on them, and you were able to do all of that, because you had that prior groundwork gone in. Just your own opinion, because it is a little bit of a bugbear of mine, I have to say. Head collars being left on foals
disaster.
without the appropriate checking, and the argument of leather head collars versus nylon head collars, particularly when there isn't the attention given with the checks.
Leather, if you're going to have to use a head collar, leather head collars are essential. The other ones are a death trap for the horses. And again, you get a head collar made of nylon trapped in a tree branch or something, you're going to damage the nerves around the top of the head, as well as giving the horse a big fright. And horses are first-time learners, so anything that happens to them that is negative early on in their career, they will remember it, and it'll take some time to, if you like, overcome it. So leather is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful material to use with horses, because it will break. But if at all possible, I would always say don't leave them out with head collars on. If you do the work that I suggest as a yearling and as a 2-year-old, there's never any need to put a head collar on. They come to you, they're quite confident, no problem at all.
And can I also ask, in relation to your foals, would you tend to do any, we'll say, work with them where you tether them, or is that a part of your training?
Work with them while I what?
Would you tether them? Would you tie them? Would you tie them?
Not in a big space. No, absolutely not. I would try and I would before they when they're a foal at about 3 weeks, I would do quite a lot before the farrier comes to begin with, working in a smaller area. But again, I make sure they never learn to pull back, so I don't give them anything fixed to pull back against. And I would get them to lead then and pick up their feet and that sort of stuff. As regards seeing them here in the field, as I said, I think you need to be very careful. Your point is very good about being by yourself with young horses in a field. You have to be very careful. But I would, there are opportunities, changing fields, putting them in a trailer, maybe they have to go to a vet. There are opportunities all the time to handle them and work with them. And a trailer is a very good place to do some handling for a young horse. Again, initially without the young horse being tied up, and then with some elasticated cross ties tied up, the trailer, it contains it. But they should never learn to panic and hurt themselves by pulling back.
Absolutely. So I think the sound is okay on this particular one, so I'll just check the volumes up on that, and we can play this and have a little bit of a talk about it afterwards.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Do you want to say something?
Just to point out that this is you will see on the film earlier on, there's work we would do to get to this stage.
That was actually part of what I would ask you about afterwards. So we might play it first, and have a little bit of talk then.
Always try to leave your hand on the horse wherever you are, and then if the horse makes a sudden move, they were going to push you away. If you have no hands on the horse and they jump, then they tend to tread on your toes. So picking up a foreleg from the left, put your left hand round the leg from the inside, lean in a little bit, and then come to the bottom pastern and pick the leg up. That is so much easier for the horse to understand than just grabbing at the bottom of the foot. So always start with your hand on the horse. Then the horse doesn't get any surprises. And your hand comes down and then transfers to the inside. You stay close to the horse and you ask the horse to pick up the hind leg. If it was a baby horse, I would then tap like this. Oh! That is not something to be punished, it's something to be repeated. Good. Reward the behavior that you want repeated. Oh, a genuine 3-year-old. Good girl. Good. Good.
So yeah, like you say, it's evident that obviously there has been some work done before this point. Maybe talk to us, like obviously this mare, she's calm and she's obviously used to being cross-tied and being in that space. Talk to us a little bit about the before this point, William.
Well, we're going to see the film, I hope. But this bit, genuinely, that was either day 4 or day 5. And as well as having the teeth problem, she also had a little abscess in her near hind. And that's why she was a little more difficult being dealt with. And she got fed up with me poulticing the near hind. But I think it's day 5 into the process. And she's on cross ties, but those cross ties are elastic. And everything is introduced very gradually. And I hope you'll see in the film in a moment, you start off with nothing. The most important stage of all is you start off with no tack, no bridle, no saddle, no head collar. You don't try and lead them, tie them up or anything, but you just get them to move around you. And you do that in walk in a smaller area. I have an area that's about 10 meters diameter. I get them to walk around me, change the rein, and you'll find in a very short space of time that they'll want to come to you.
I can play that one in the background. You can talk over it if you wish.
Okay, so here is my 10-meter area. It's got no corners to it. I deliberately have that water butt there, and I'll put other things in as well to get them used to things at an early stage. I just stay behind the horse. So she was totally new to me, and she'd never been in this environment. So I stay behind them, and I ask her to walk on. If she had started trotting, then I would move a little bit more to my left there and encourage her to walk, and I would, of course, use my voice. But this stage is so important. I don't have to struggle with anything. I don't have to struggle to get a head collar on. I don't have to struggle to get the horse to go forward. It's all totally obvious. And the horse is much happier, as the horse has not got used to me, that I can stay away from the horse, but ask the horse to do something very simple and then reward. And within a very short space of time, she goes from looking to the outside to say, how can I escape this? To say, okay, this person's communicating with me. And of course, a young horse loves it when they realize that a human being is communicating with them. So this is what I do at the start, and particularly with the wild horses or spoiled horses. This suddenly makes it all so simple. And within a short space of time, the horse will want to turn and come towards you. And then you can put the head collar on. And here I put the bridle on, but without a bit.
I pause that just there for a second and I can come back into it. But, at the start, when you start working with these young horses, I mean, you mentioned in your opening clip the relatedness of the age of animals to children, and like we know that when we send the really young ones off to the play school type scenario, they're not there for as long, and then they start to build up their time and all the rest of it, what sort of duration of training time would you recommend, we'll say, when you're starting and as you build?
You'll hear me talk about it later on, but if you get this early stage done well, you've just built up a bit of trust and confidence here, and you're talking about what you're seeing there is day 2. If you build up that trust and confidence, then it's very easy to have all the tack on the horse in 3 days, 4 days without a problem. If you are having a problem, you have to back off. And there are some horses that may take, because of they've been spoilt in the past, may take much longer, but it's worth putting in the time. So you go step by step progressively. So it didn't take...
Absolutely. I suppose I'm coming at it more from the angle of, I suppose, in a single training session, how much time might you spend with a horse? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, you're okay. Perfectly okay.
That's a very good question. Much better to do 2 quarter-hour sessions a day than 1 long session. So I would very, very rarely with this, I got to the stage of backing this mare, and it would be 20 minutes, half an hour at most each time.
And, just going back, I suppose, to the previous clip, and obviously how important it is about lifting the feet and all of that, and, making sure that you can handle the legs and all of that easily. But I think, it's important maybe to just pay reference for everybody as well this evening, the importance it is that the feet themselves are actually attended to before getting into the point of asking horses to do work.
But I had to do, this is the horse that was unknown to me. I was treating her like an untouched horse. I would not get in, I'm 70 and overweight. And all the time I say, what is the safe thing to do? And what was the safe thing to do for older people, younger people, less experienced people? I would not even begin to handle the feet until I can get to this stage where they're happy with me leading from both sides. They're happy with me doing the basic lunging and handling over the body. Then I can start tackling the feet. Agreed.
I'm alluding, I suppose, more to the care of the feet from the farrier, that the feet are in a good condition to withstand work, I guess.
For sure. I mean, it absolutely. Thankfully, I would say that we are better than some countries, but the feet have to be attended to, and you see some terrible sights with horses that aren't attended to, and you can create a better shape. We're very lucky to have a good farrier, but you can create a good shape with regular shoeing, a regular care of the feet, not shoeing, just care of the feet. And it's an absolute must. No foot, no os, and it's an absolute must from the very start.
What I'll do is I'll allow this to play on, and you can talk us through a little bit further here, William.
So it's very important that I use a lunge rope as opposed to a lunge line. And if I'm going to hold the lunge rope in my left hand, I wind it into the right hand. This is one of the times when people are putting themselves most at danger, is getting tied up in their ropes. Any person who's a sailor knows how important it is to be good with the ropes. So the basic rule is, if you're going to hold the lunge rein in one hand, you need to wind it into the other hand at the start. So you saw me wind it into my right hand, and now I've got it in my left hand, and I'm ready to lunge on the left rein. And then you can see here that there's no inward pressure here. I was talking about the teeth early on. That is quite secure enough, or very secure, to lunge in, but there's no inward pressure, and there's no pressure on those protruding upper jaw molars, and there's no pressure there on the infraorbital nerve, and there's no pressure. The 2 delicate nose bones, which are below that, the nose piece there, nose band should never go lower than that. They should be banned otherwise, because you get fractures on those 2 delicate nose bones. So you can see that this bridle sits slightly higher than a drop nose band, a lot of people have, but lower than a crank nose band. And that's where the research shows that there is the least problems with nerve endings. And I have the D-snaffle there, which I find to be excellent. And so I've already done this without any tack, and now I do it with tack. The walls are pretty high, but you can fashion a small area. Everybody can fashion a small area. the horse is understanding me and has now got a chance to get used to the rope. If I'd started off with the rope straight away, they'd say, oh, what's this big snake chasing me? And all of the time, if I want to go more forward, I can move, in this case, to the right, get more behind her backside. If I want to slow her down, I can move to the left. A lot of use of the voice, but small number of words. So the horse gets used to the words for reward and gets used to the word for slowing down. So slowing down words are lower, going forward words are higher. But I use a very small range of words so they can begin to understand them. See me moving there to keep it going forwards. And I made the point about the water butt and everything, try and introduce them to the world as soon as possible. So maybe at the end of a session, you lead them down towards a road, if there is a road, and just let them stand and look at the traffic. So it's a lovely halt, horse happy. I come out to the horse, I change my lunge whip into the other hand, so I'm ready to lead, and I use the words of command as I go forwards and as I halt. Now, another clip I think I show you about how to introduce the roller, but the roller is the absolute key thing. First of all, it must have a breastplate on, and the roller is made from a cotton material, lamp wick, so it's very soft and it's very quiet, which is important, and it has an elasticated insert. Now, I had introduced the roller before this, and I start off with it being very loose, but it is vital that you have the breastplate, and you always get the breastplate done up first, and then you do up the roller very quietly, very loosely to begin with. And when taking it off, you do it in reverse. You undo the roller and then you do the breastplate. And there is nothing more, no piece of equipment that's more important than that roller. And you don't need a big lunge whip. That's my father's stick there, which he used. You can do everything just with a stick like that, and particularly for leading, it's terrific. So here I'm just showing that the horse is being taught how to be led, not by pulling it from the nose, but by staying between its shoulder and its head, holding with the right rein. And I have my stick there, so if I need to have a little bit of help to go forward, I can move my stick backwards like that to ask the horse to go forward, because it's very important for customers and selling a horse that the horses will trot up. So I start by doing it in walk, and here we have a little narrow lane, and then I would progress to doing it in trot. I'm not sure this is just the walk one, yeah. And what I do is I would walk from the left-hand side going up to the arena, and coming back down from the arena, I would walk from the right-hand side. So I teach the horse, it doesn't take any extra time. We have to make that journey, but I teach the horse from the beginning to walk from both sides. And as regards making the horse more even, not being bent to the left all the time, which is the typical one, it's important to be able to lead them from both sides. And as I said, it doesn't take any more time. And it means that they're always more willing to go back to the stable. So when you're on their, if you like, less side that they're less used to humans, you can do it going towards home. And in the same little narrow lane here, you see me ready for the Tokyo Olympics running along, teaching the horse to trot up in hand. But why not take that opportunity? So everything has added value. So I want to spend less time rather than more time. I want maximum result for minimum effort. I want to be able to make good use of the horse's potential by not wasting time.
Absolutely. I'm just going to stop the presentation share there for a moment, William, and I'm going to check on the Q&As because I know there's some come in. But whilst I'm doing that, I suppose to emphasize as well too, in your work with the horse, you are very careful in the use of your whip. The whip is a tool, it's not a weapon, and you're not trying to create fear by the use of your whip either.
It's a communication tool.
Yeah.
Those people with a heavy use a heavy hunting whip. In my experience, that builds up huge problems. You need something very light, and as I said, that sort of 5'6" stick that my father used to use is quite sufficient. You don't need a lot of cracking of the whips. I use a lunging whip, but it's one of the very light ones, and it would be very rare that I do anything more than just indicate where I want to go with a touch on the horse's bottom. A touch. I touch on the horse's bottom and slightly lower. You have to be very careful. Some people with these very long lunge whips, they use the whip, they're not under control of it, and it whips around the horse's hind leg just below the hock or on the hock, and then the horse gallops off with this whip chasing them, and then they have a terrible accident. At a big sale about 10 years ago, there was a horse that got loose with a lunge rein chasing it and jumped into people. But horses just don't do that unless they're being chased in that way.
Indeed. Yeah, and just I suppose as well too, while I'm getting this working again, the environment that you choose to work in as well, you know, I suppose bearing in mind that you're working with a young horse, you're mindful about the type of environment that you choose, and you know the level of, I suppose, risk that you're creating or not creating in
yes,
that.
But don't make it too sanitized. I didn't point out before, but there were 2 grey ponies looking over the fence when I went up when I walked her up the track earlier on. And it's very important that they gradually get used to other horses, noises, things that are going on. The worst thing is to try and make it totally quiet. And then the first noise that comes along, they have a big jump. Probably I have a big jump as well.
You won't set them up for failure either. You'll
No.
increase that progressively.
Absolutely. And that's why, as the horses get a little older, it's a great thing to take them for a journey in the trailer, sometimes even to go to a show or something, but not to actually do anything and then take them home again. It's like, I remember John Whitaker always used to say that he liked to travel his novice horses, his novice jumpers, obviously a little older than this, to the shows for a season and only exercise them and not compete them, but they would just get used to the traveling, used to the environment, and then they'd benefit from it. So this is a young horse. This is actually Mandiba as a 3-year-old. Mandiba went to the Hong Kong Olympics with Karen O'Connor from America. And you can see on the left, the head, you've got the Micklem bridle. Then on the bottom left, you have the bit being introduced. I don't have to take anything off. And then the next stage is to introduce the roller. And I think we have a little clip about introducing the roller.
We do have it coming up.
Just before we start that, this is a key thing, as I began to say earlier. In Australia and New Zealand, a lot of the people who break young horses, start young horses is a better term. They do it bareback, and people say, "Gosh, how could they possibly do that?" But I think it took me a little while to understand this. But most horses are bucking not against the rider on top, but they're bucking against the girth. So it's like a small bucking strap. So by using this type of roller and introducing it very carefully, they can get used to the pressure around their tummy, and then you have no problem with putting the saddle on, and they never learn to buck against the girth. But in my opinion, a lot of horses who so-called are trying to buck the rider off are not bucking the rider off, they're bucking against the girth. So we'll play the little clip about introducing the roller.
And maybe just even actually before I go on to that, just in the sense of, I suppose, when you are working in young horses, just something that crossed my mind as well to mention, you know, your own, if you get up out of the bed in a bad mood of a morning and, you know, you go out to try and teach your youngster something new, is that maybe might it not be the best day to actually take on to do that? It's
not. But what I would say is that, I mean, I love young horses, and horses are life enhancing. I can guarantee that I'm in a bad mood to go with the horses for a little period of time. I'm in a good mood. Indeed.
I'm just going to play this here, and hopefully that sound is working.
Why are we out here in the arena in this crucial stage of introducing the roller? It's because although the horse may be more quiet in a smaller space, indeed in the stable, I do all of these type of things outside so that if we do have a major problem, the horse is not going to be injured and the person is not going to be injured. I even introduced the rider outside in a small space. My brother Charlie was left on a horse in a stable that suddenly erupted and had his head smashed against the ceiling and the wall. That's the sort of thing we want to avoid, as well as damage to the horse. So, introducing the roller, you have to do it, start at the front by the neck where the horse is used to it, then gradually go back. Ideally keep your spare hand on the horse all the time so that you can feel if there's any tension. So here she's not worried at all. And then we swap and do it the other side. I'm still being meticulous about the rope, so I've actually turned the rope through 90 degrees so the horse did dash off. it's still going to come out of my hand easily. So the hand that's closest to the horse's nose is the one that feels whether there's any tension and controls the horse. And then the other hand, again the up and down, all the way back, and again there's no problem. So it's just a matter of progression. Ideally we would do this with an assistant to hold the horse, but equally if we got people to progress slowly like this, there's no problem. Keeping hold of the roller all the time, the first thing I attach is the breastplate. And so this is super important. Always attach the breastplate first of all, because you don't want anything slipping back and becoming a button strap. And I leave everything out, so that if I want to grab something to undo it quickly, I can do that easily. Then, as I take the other side, the first thing I do before attaching it is just to pull a little, squeeze a little. Notice the reaction. Good girl. And then gradually we'll do it up. That's why I have a single buckle, not two buckles. And we will start, if you can see, with it being very loose. Not so loose that they could get a leg through it, but very loose so that when they blow out they don't get any pressure. And then gradually we tighten it up hole by hole when we're working. But what we don't want is for the horse to learn to buck against the roller or the girth. Many horses, people think they're trying to buck off the rider. What they're often trying to do is buck against the girth or against the roller. So by starting in this progressive, gradual way, a horse never learns to buck against it and is always confident with that pressure around its middle. So did anybody notice my deliberate mistake? This is very important. I have gloves on for safety. Never lunge without gloves. Secondly, have a hat on your head. And I didn't have my hat on. And I just want to emphasize that people can laugh about people on the ground not wearing a hat and appearing to be overcautious. But we've all accepted that if you're going to go out for a bike ride now, you need to put a hat on your head. And the same applies to working with horses. The likelihood of ever having a horse's foot on top of your head is very, very small. But we always have to think ahead and always have to be aware that on some days there may be a sudden gust of wind. We may trip over our own feet. All sorts of things may happen where a hat could save our lives.
So yeah, some very salient points in all of that. I mean, it shouldn't be an objective to get the buck out of the horse. The objective should be not to create the buck in the first place. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I suppose, you know, another just question that I would have for you as well, that I'm sure others may have, you know, before you actually move out of that sort of safer space, that smaller area where you've started your horses, what kind of, I suppose, what body language are you looking to read from them, and what, you know, at what stage are you looking for them to be at before you will take them out into this larger space to work with them?
Well, I think that most people can tell when a horse is calm. And of course, one of the first things they do when they're calm is they drop their head. And also, you need to watch the ears, so that when a horse is tuned into you, their inside eye will be on you and their inside ear. And as luck would have it, that still shows this at the moment. So they can use the eyes independently. So they should be looking forward with the outside eye and looking forward with the outside ear, and the inside ear will be on you. So you know for certain then that they are concentrating on you, which probably means not because they're frightened of you, because if they were frightened, they would just look backwards, but they are happy to be worked by you, and they want to listen to what you're saying. So their head will be dropped, their breathing will be normal, their skin will be relaxed, and the whole demeanor would suggest that they're just enjoying themselves on a sunny day. And it's worthwhile taking the time to get to that stage.
Absolutely. And I'm assuming that you will happily also spend quite a bit of time working with the roller and introducing the roller before you get to that stage of actually tightening it if you need to.
Absolutely. But the joy is with the breastplate there is that using the breastplate, I have the roller so that even when they blow out, they can't feel the roller. I will then lunge them in that roller, and I will keep lunging them and gradually tightening up that roller until there's absolutely no problem. Now, this mare had no problem from the beginning. So I tightened up the roller to riding tightness, if you like, by the end of the second day. And that's when I would begin to introduce the saddle. But there are other horses, particularly if they've had a fright in the past, they may take much longer than that. The big thing, of course, is just to make that first connection. But even if you make that first connection, if they have had a fright in the past, they may take much longer before they're really confident with having the roller done up and then the saddle at a level of tightness which is sufficient to ride. So I am thinking of some individual horses. Our young horses, most of them were ridden away at home in 3 weeks, certainly not more than that. But there was one particular horse that took 9 months. It was a horse that had been spoilt before, and it needed that time. So here you have in the picture Mandiba, you have the roller, and you have the addition of a saddle pad. So that's the progression to a saddle. I put on that's on the left there. I put a saddle pad on first of all, and then when they're used to that and happy with that, I introduce the saddle, also with a breastplate, absolutely vital. And particularly if it's a windy day, I will use an overgirth to hold down the flaps of the saddle, and I won't put the irons on to begin with. Now, it may be in one session you get to the stage of putting the irons on, but I need to go through those various steps.
That is to play
So when
on.
I start with the saddle, I start without the irons, and I put a surcingle around the top of the saddle so that the flaps don't fly around. Particularly on a windy day, that can cause a problem which the horse will then take too long to recover from. It's a waste of your time. And when I introduce the girth, this is my own girth, I have elastic at both ends, and I have the shaping so that there's no pinching around the horse's elbow. It works fantastic. And you can see there's a slight curve on the whole girth. That's why the Micklem girth fits the actual shape of the horse, because the horse is not totally symmetrical under the girth. So when we start lunging with the stirrup irons on, we want a really good way to keep the stirrup irons safe and not give the horse a fright. So start with the end of the leather on the outside, bring it round underneath, up the front, down the back, and then you can thread the excess of the leather through there and through the little slip there, and that's super safe and won't suddenly come down and frighten the horse. Gradually, over a period of time, you get the horse used to the stirrup irons, and not to have them too long, probably slightly shorter than that, and tie them from this side all the way over to the other side so they don't flap. So everything is introduced one step at a time.
So, and we're actually going to kill the sound on this piece, William, and I'll let you talk over it. All right.
Okay. So with this horse, I've moved, because she was quiet, I've moved from the smaller area to the bigger area. And that's always looking to get added value. So it's no point not tackling going out into a bigger area. When I get them to move off, that's one of the dangerous periods. So you saw me step away from the horse and create space between myself and the horse. And that's very important. This was probably second or third day in for the side reins. So the side reins are long and there are elasticated inserts in the side reins. As the horse begins to work, you will find that they will naturally produce a white mouth. All horses produce a white mouth unless they're frightened or else they've had a bad experience in the past. Even with no bit in the mouth, they will produce a white mouth, which is the biggest reason to explain that you don't need key bits. As they begin to come through their backs, as they begin to relax, then they will produce a white mouth, with or without a bit. We're going to have a close-up, I think, in a moment. So with the lunging, you have to be equally proficient on the left and the right rein, and most people are better on the left rein to begin with. So you have to practice until you are ambidextrous. Coming to a halt there, coming to a walk there, I just had to change my position because she halted. I didn't want her to halt. Here we're trying to do a close-up. There is a bit of a white mouth coming. That's why I wanted to close up. And you'll see my lunge rein is rather like a riding rein, but she's totally quiet in the mouth. One of the big problems we have is horses that are not quiet in the mouth, that lift the tongue, they champ and are unhappy in the mouth. You can see how she's totally happy with the bit. And then we just have little lightweight side reins with the elasticated inserts, nothing to bounce around. And we have them nice and long to begin with. This wasn't the first day. We want them to be quiet in the mouth. And then as they relax, they will drop their heads and necks.
And just William, I suppose, you know, when you would start to work with the side reins initially, would you fit one side rein? Would you fit both side reins? How do you approach that?
I definitely fit both side reins. I know about fitting one side rein itself, but I find it leads to more problems. I fit both side reins and a bit longer than that. And I really honestly can say I don't have problems. And you can see what's happening here. Good lunging creates so-called join up. So that's such an important thing. You can do it without any tack. You can do it without a lunge rein. Just by having this sort of communication, then you get join up and the horse is happy. But start with the side reins long enough and shorten them very quietly. And every day you start with them long and then gradually shorten them up a little bit. But it'll only be a little bit at a time, and be very careful about the walk, because the horse needs to nod its head and neck in the walk. It's a natural movement of the head and neck, so you mustn't have the side reins too short. So as the horse gets more advanced and they're a little more advanced shape in the trot, then the side reins will be too short for the walk. And that's one of the big problems of long reining, is that very often we go too slowly and the horse is restricted in the use of its head and neck. I find that it's easier to teach people and horses just to do simple lunging first of all. And I like to keep it as simple as possible. And the horse will lunge and be calm, forwards and straight, then we're really winning. And an interesting point there, you saw a horse walker behind. As regards being calm, forwards and straight, I find that the horse walker is terrific for the straightness, because in an arena like this, the horse clings to the outside, which is why I don't have a fence against the edge of the arena. And they put their shoulder to the outside, and crookedness is a major problem in young horses. But on the horse walker, they cling to the inside. And so they're putting their shoulder in the right place. They're keeping the shoulder in front of the hind end, even a little to the inside. And I've never known a horse on a horse walker, as long as things become quiet, that doesn't relax and drop its head and neck. We don't need any gadgets. We can put them between the aids, because if we put them from the back end to the front end, we don't tie the head and neck down. So the business of tying them down in the stable, the business of very short side reins, the business of driving them with too much of a heavy hand are all disastrous as regards keeping a natural outline. And later on, I'll show you some more pictures of a natural outline and see how it relates to a higher level horse.
Absolutely. I have to say that is a bugbear of mine, is to see animals tied down in the stable, or even tied down in side reins and turned out in the paddock either. I don't think that
it's appalling. And increasingly, it's one of the many reasons which turn people off horses. What we do with horses has to be acceptable, so that we get this, what is called the social license, so that people outside of horses think that it's fair with what we're doing with horses.
I'll play this, William, and I'll allow you to talk over this one as well.
So, always in control of the lunge rope. And I face the same way as the horse. I don't sit square to the horse. I face the same way as the horse. So if I want to start walking, I can do so very easily. Shortening the lunge rein, point the whip backwards, then the whip hand comes forward, shortens the lunge rein by a whole loop. So one has to become proficient with both hands, shortening and lengthening the lunge rein, the lunge rope, and being good with your positioning. But you can see I'm stepping one foot in front of the other so that I don't trip up over my own feet. I make a point of this because a lot of people are taught to lunge with their shoulders parallel with the horse's shoulders, but it's disastrous. It takes you further away from the horse. It could damage your ankles, and it makes you much less effective in terms of being able to walk. So you see the size of circle that's being used is a sort of 12 meter circle. It varies, but I suppose most of the time I'm working sort of 12 meters through to 18 meter type circle on the lunge. Sometimes I may, particularly if the horse is worried about my own presence, I will work and walk and have the horse closer to me. But I want to be able to be able to go a little faster and a little slower, and I want to be able to canter as well. The canter is something the horse has to get used to, particularly as regards the saddle. You'll find that some horses will get an immediate tightening in the canter and they get a little anxious, put their back up. So that one has to be done gradually, but they can't hold their breath in canter. So the canter is great to get them breathing and relaxing, and the canter is great for the forwardness, and the canter is great for communication. So this was at an early stage, and you can see that the horse is not worried by me at all. Again, being very careful how I organize my rope, where I put my whip, so I don't frighten the horse.
And you're using quite an open space there, William.
Yeah, so everything is progression. So I started in the yard, and then I went to it's about an 18-meter wide, smaller arena at the other end. And then I have a big arena here. And if they are going well, then I move into the big arena. Now, this is the same arena, and this is Mandiba as a 3-year-old. On the right-hand side, you can see him in a similar shape to the horse, to the mare you've just been watching. And then this was day 3. And without any exaggeration, we did a photo essay for my book, The Complete Horse Riding Manual. And the horse I was going to use when we jumped out over a gate with a thunderstorm and cut herself very badly. And so I had to get this horse, Mandiba, in out of the field. And the photo in the left was taken on day 3. So you can see that we have some contact through the side reins. We can have all the equipment is there. We have the saddle done on in such a way as we can introduce the rider. But that was 3 days. And that's the sort of shape they should be going. Now, I would not normally long rein the horses very much unless I have a horse that's very difficult. It's almost like a separate art. Some people are very good at it, but excessive long reining and going too slow in walk is a major problem. So there are some people who are very skillful using 2 reins on a circle, and that's good. But you have to be really athletic on your feet. And I see probably the majority of horses that I see being long reined become overbent and become mouthy. And that's what we've got to avoid. That's what we've got to change so that people come to Ireland knowing that the horses are quiet in the mouth. Now, Karen O'Connor bought Mandiba sight unseen because she trusted me. I used to teach her. She knew me. I know her. She trusted me that the horse would be well started. There wouldn't be any major problems. And the same for High Kingdom, was bought sight unseen. And the more that people trust what we do, the more we keep things of high quality at this stage, the more people would say, this is fine. I know what I'm going to get with this horse. I can trust the way that it's being produced.
I just want to acknowledge to attendees that I do know there are some questions there, and I will go out to look at them shortly.
Now, the mare by Katie Goff, she's by Chill Out, fantastic horse, fantastic stallion for producing event horses and jumpers. He himself was by the world show jumping champion himself. And you can see that she has real ability. But what you're seeing here, as I wanted to point out, is jumping on both reins. I do everything on both reins, and it's a disaster when horses get used to jumping just off the left lead, even in a straight line, in loose jumping of a horse. You watch slowly, you watch in slow motion, and you'll find that all of the canter is done on one leg, and they probably take off with the inside hind leg a little bit in front of the outside hind leg and things like that. They must jump on both reins. And then this is a 4-year-old, also out of the same mare as Mandiba and High Kingdom, but by Seacrest. And again, this was done as a photo essay. This horse, this was its 3rd time of riding. We did the backing for real, the photo essay. This was its 3rd time of riding. First, the picture on the left, you can see that the horse is calm, naturally drops its head, very happy with the rider's weight and contact. And then you see the horse top right in trot and top left in canter. You can see there is no reason why a horse can't be between the aids, connected and going like that at a very early stage. The jump from the good lunging without a rider on to this is very easy. To get to when they're good on the lunge may be more difficult. I said it took 3 days with Mandiba. With High Kingdom, it took 3 months. And although he could be backed, I have a photograph of him being ridden for the first time by my wife, Sarah. Although he could be backed early on, I didn't ride him away until after 3 months, because there's no point to do any riding until they are going with good quality.
And when you say going with good quality, William, can you Can you break that down a little bit, just to kind of explain to people what it is you're really looking for before you make that transition?
Well, first of all, they're totally happy with the rider's weight. They're totally happy with the rider's leg contact, and they're totally happy with the rider's rein contact. With good lunging, the rein contact is done for itself, is not a difficulty. That in the 3 paces, they must be natural. In other words, the walk must be equal space of time between each beat. It's 4 beats. And every time the hind leg goes forward, the head and neck should go forward. And that's one of the big weaknesses that we see in young horses, is because they've been tied down, because they've been restricted through the mouth, that they actually nod their head backwards in the walk. Every time the hind leg comes forward, the head and neck should come forward. But you often see it come backwards because they've been restricted. And the trot, equal space of time between each beat. It's a two-time pace. The canter is a 3-time pace plus a period of suspension. There's no point riding a canter without a period of suspension. It only teaches the horse to go badly. And then, because they're happy with the leg and they have a little understanding of the leg, you ask them to go forward from the leg to the rein contact. And as they're relaxed, and if they have sufficient from behind, then automatically they will be connected from the back end to the front end. It just happens. But the basis of that is getting to the stage when they're using the backs on the lunge.
And, you know, in the sense of really trying to explain to somebody, and maybe just go back up into this video here.
So the rein, the side reins are quite long. So I give lots of time. Side reins are long enough to do the walk. So I give lots of time for the horse to accept that. Now, obviously, I wouldn't be in this big arena if she wasn't happy with going round me in a circle. You know, she's not trying to nap towards the gate. She's not doing anything else but to go forwards. And those are the key 3 words: calm, forwards, and straight. I made a mention of the straightness because of the using the horse walker. Now, as regards to the straightness on the lunge, you know, you want the horse's head and neck to be in front of him or her, and make sure you lunge on both reins. Sometimes I would shorten the inside side rein or lengthen the outside side rein. Most of the time, there's not a lot of difference between the two. But I would lunge them on both reins, and I would ask them to go forward to trot. Soon they pick up that. I say rut, and they trot. And maybe when I go canter, I just lift my whip about 6 inches. They learn that that's the canter command. You do the first canter just by going on a bit faster and by clicking a little bit, and you get the canter. As you do that, you just lift the whip. And within a very short space of time, they're just lifting the whip there. 6 inches is enough to get the horse to understand that that's cantering.
But
so,
at this point, how are you assessing that the horse is coming through its back, William?
It's not coming through the back in the canter there.
Yeah.
So
if I go back.
So the only thing I'm doing there with the canter is getting the horse to understand the command, and also to give a bit more forwardness for the trot.
So in other words, like what I'm trying to come at is, if you're trying to explain to somebody at home,
yes,
you know, in looking this, can you vocalize that?
As the stance time becomes shorter and the flight times become longer, so I'm sure you've been aware of a horse in the field that may be just a little excited, they start springing off the ground more. So the period of suspension becomes slightly longer. But the head and neck the whole time needs to be in a natural position, and it takes a little time to study and looking at horses to know what the natural position is. That head and neck is in a natural position. The horse is not fully coming through its back yet, so the head and neck should be a little bit up. But I don't think we have. Maybe we do have another clip of it. But it wasn't long before we got to a stage on the left there of that horse, with the horse coming through the back a tiny bit more. And as it came through the back, you see that reaching down to the rein contact. So you can see actually the pole of the horse there is not dissimilar to the height of the backside of the horse.
No, I just think that's a very relevant point.
But by that question you ask is, we need a whole nother series of films.
Yes, indeed,
you know,
indeed.
But this is for beginners.
Yeah.
And we're covering quite a lot, but so what we really need is half an hour of watching horses go. But what we're playing around with as trainers is to get the right direction and the right speed. So what I would do is start on the rein that was easiest for the horse. Often that's the left rein, but not always. So start off on the rein that's easiest for the horse in the pace that's easiest for the horse. So almost certainly that's trot. So when you're in the trot, then play around a little bit with the speed. Go a little faster, go a little slower, and note the reaction. And then as the horse becomes settled, drops the head and neck a little bit, you might ask a little bit, tiny bit more without going faster, and a tiny bit more without going faster. Then you might shorten the side reins a whole because the shape of the horse has changed. So it's step by step, little by little. Then you have the horse between the aids on one rein in one pace. And then you start maybe doing it also in canter, or you may change the rein and do the same thing on the other rein, the right rein. But the trot has got only 2 beats, so you get into less trouble with the trot. And for most horses, the trot is a little easier. Not always, but I would use primarily the trot, little bits of trot, trying to get a little bit more energy. But we're talking about, that's another ball game. I'd love to come back and I'll show you more videos.
And we will have you back. What bridle would you recommend for a pony that has pole issues or problems?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
What bridle would you recommend for a pony that has pole issues or problems?
You mean is sensitive on the pole?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's that they're not alone. I mean, it's going to get boring, but I hate to say it, but my bridle has a very wide headpiece, so you want to spread the bearing surface out. That's very important. But before you do that, I would try and find the source of the problem. Is it over a small area? Is it over the whole area? Is it the ears? Where is the particular problem? And again, it sounds too simple, but reward the behavior you want repeated. So you reward the horse when it's not doing anything silly about being touched, maybe just behind the pole, either side of the pole, and then you begin to reward it touching the sensitive area. And when it learns that it's not a problem, then you can overcome it. It is possible to do nerve blocks in individual areas to find out what is causing the problem. So head shakers is now proved conclusively. There are 2 main areas, one internal area and 2 external areas. One is the top of the head, and the other is because of pressure on the infraorbital nerves, which I mentioned. And nerve blocking there can show you where the damage is or what needs protecting. And it is possible to when you isolate that particular area, is to avoid that area with different shapes of headpieces and bends and things. But again, what I would say is the vast majority of horses that I've found have been difficult in the head. You can overcome that problem. Gilt Edge, which was an example of an Irish horse that was won more medals than any other Irish horse in the history of US eventing. He was very difficult until the end of his life to get the bridle on. So you had to separate the bridle into its individual parts and then put the bridle together. And then he was happy. So sometimes you have to say, well, listen, I'm not going to fight this. I'm going to go with it and see where we get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some questions that have come in there that are just on topics that we won't have time to delve into this evening. So we'll definitely have a part 2 to this, William, I reckon. But you did just want to mention a couple of these.
I wanted particularly to mention about mouse discomfort, comfort, and lack of quietness and acceptance of the bit, because this is key. We have to sell a message to the world that we are conscious of the fact that the horses should be quiet in the mouth. We don't want the lifting of the tongue. We don't want the grinding, the holding head sideways. We don't want the tongue sticking out. It's just not acceptable. So we mentioned about teeth, wolf teeth, badly fitting bit, particularly bits used to be in the racing world, they were all too wide, but that doesn't happen anymore. Cheek lacerations, which I've mentioned about because of the upper jaw teeth and the lower jaw teeth being in different dimensions. Excessive pressure on the lunge. When lunging, it comes from side reins being too short, and it comes from lunging off the bit. So I don't like lunging off the bit with a young horse. Some people can manage it, but if you want to make it more simple for yourself and have less room for error, then don't lunge off the bit. You get a problem with the long reining. You need to walk very fast. You need to be athletic. You've got a long length of rope, 2 ropes. You need to make sure they're not too heavy. And when riding, you must have an allowing hand, not heavy hands, and pulley reins, running reins, and things like that. You have to be so careful. I mean, I say call them pulley reins because people have to understand as soon as you put these gadgets on the horse that they are very strong. And the vast majority of horses keep it simple. You don't need anything like that. And certainly you don't on the lunge. As I said, I've never found a horse that doesn't drop its head and relax when it's on the horse walker. And the same will apply to the lunging. And then gradually you get a bit more impulsion and you put them between the aids. So the business
we have
of tying,
spoken about the horse in the stable and tying down already.
Yeah. So the big thing, number 2 there, must have a natural outline. If the horse is slightly hollow in its back, it should have its head and neck in the air. Bringing its head and neck down without doing anything to the back creates an unnatural outline. It's disastrous. The horse needs to be calm, forwards and straight. That will never let you down. If I'm selling a horse and I tell the customer my horse is calm, forward and straight, they're delighted. It is the basis for all future work. Lack of good lunging is, we need to get better at our lunging and lunge well on both reins. Okay.
So just before I suppose I'll play this. I'll play this one.
The question is, how long does all this process take? Well, if your horses have been well handled, particularly as yearling 2-year-olds, it certainly won't take very long. But the vast majority of horses, even ones that are new to me, will take between 3 to 5 days to get all the tack on and have them lunging quietly. Then there are other horses who've had a bad experience earlier on in their life, and it may take much longer than that. And when I say much longer, I mean much longer. It may take a matter of a month before the horse really settles down. But it's worth it to do that. But the vast majority of horses, 3 to 5 days. But then the next phase is the imponderable, is how long does it take to get the horse to lunge really well and to come through in his back. Well, with Mandeba, my famous horse, which was ridden by Karen O'Connor, he was through in his back and with lunging with all the tack on in 3 days. His full brother, High Kingdom, it took 3 months before he was ready to be ridden. In other words, he was coming through in his back and going with real quality. And that's what the customers want. They want no big problems. They want the horse to be going in a natural outline, quiet in the mouth. Many people would say that I'm unduly cautious. You don't have to do all of this step-by-step approach. But what we want to avoid is a serious problem. You know, a bird suddenly flying, a big noise, a sudden gust of wind, all sorts of things can suddenly cause a big problem. And if a horse gets a real fright, it can take a long time to overcome. And horses are first-time learners. So particularly with something like putting on the roller for the first time, if the horse gets a serious fright then, it will stay with him for a long, long time. So this is what I want to avoid, because what the customers want are horses that are confident, that come through the back and are quiet in the mouth. They want a natural outline. They want things where there are no major problems which they have to deal with thereafter. So in fact, many of the professionals would prefer a relatively speaking untouched horse than a horse that was spoiled.
And William, just picking up on that point, you know, I mean, when we relate all this back to the market, and I'm super conscious of the time now, and we will need to wrap up very, very shortly. But, you know, riders or buyers, you know, quite often don't want to, obviously they don't want to inherit problems that have been created by previous training. And, you know, therefore in many cases, the unbroken 3-year-old is the preference for many, you know. How, you know, do you see a way for breeders to, I suppose, you know, bridge that divide as such, and that there is, you know, to find the scope within the sector to, I suppose, engage in that high quality early production, whilst at the same time actually creating that value for breeders as well too? I mean, do you see that within reach? Absolutely.
And you're doing it. You're doing it with this presentation. You're doing it with your other presentations. And simplicity is the key thing. You know, 3 to 5 days of working, of good quality work with a horse. So we'll say it's a week of good quality working with a horse. The vast majority of horses, you can do extraordinary things as long as they've had a bit of handling earlier on. And you don't necessarily have to have them between the aids on the lunge. They have to be lunging quietly and going calm forwards and straight. So I should emphasize that. I think I'm slightly waylaid about your question about what does it mean about coming through their backs. But if the horse has had all the tack introduced and will lead quietly and is confident with human beings, we've achieved an enormous amount. But education. We have to keep doing it. And what you're doing with this presentation is a great help. And thank you very much for that. But
you're doing all the hard work here now, William. So thank you very much.
We need more.
Have you any, we'll say, final comment or final piece of advice in the sense of wrapping this up that you would like to pass on to people?
You alluded to it about being not in a good mood, but the training young horses is deeply satisfying. But it comes from a respect for them, and a love is not too strong a word for them. But if you're the sort of person who's a bully boy or bully girl and wants to do it by dominating the horses, you're in trouble. Some people say to me, it's all right, you can use this method, William, because your horses are very quiet. Well, were they all bred that way? You can make horses quiet. There will always be some that have all sorts of problems. Very briefly, I'll say that the other thing we should check on, apart from teeth and all the rest, is the fact that the horse is if you have a problem horse, it doesn't have something ghastly going on inside. It's not in pain. So horses that are in pain can often have some extreme behavior. And I can tell many stories of that, of people who prove that they had growths inside them, they had brain tumors, etc., etc. There will always be those. But the vast majority won't be like that. If you can be good, consistent methods will produce the right results.
Well, listen, William, you've been super, and there are other questions there, and I might liaise with you tomorrow on those.
If anybody can see that photograph, you saw the photograph of Mandiva on the lunge, and there he is at the Olympic Games. There isn't too much of a difference between those. He's a little more advanced, he's got a little more weight behind, but that good quality work as a young horse, it's easy then to progress to the higher levels, and that's what the buyers want. And the same applies to the jumping.
Absolutely. And like I say, there's a couple of questions there. I apologize. We might give it two, if you can give a really quick answer on these, and we'll see how we go, right?
Go.
When lunging, how to deal with a horse that rushes when changing direction, gets a little playful, and takes off squealing quite fast?
Take off the tack. Lunge it without any attack. Wait for the horse to settle. I've never met a horse that goes on and on and on like that day after day after day. It just doesn't happen. So take off the tack, stay away from the horse, don't put yourself in a dangerous situation, particularly at the start point of lunging. It is potentially dangerous. You need to stay a sufficient distance away from your horse. Take off the tack, loose lunge the horse.
Super. At what stage would you introduce pull work and jumping, and at what height? And do you think horses are started too early?
I think certainly horses are jumped too big, too early, and they're not jumped on both reins. I do as little jumping as I possibly can, I suppose. The 3-year-olds, yes, I would jump. What sort of size fence? Well, it depends entirely on their ability. If you're relating it to their potential, then I would say jump them about half, 5 out of 10, half of what they could do at maximum, and get them confident in doing that. And then for the photograph, get them to jump at a level of 6 or 7 out of 10, and that's sufficient. But as regards selling the horse, that doesn't sell your horse generally. Horses have to have the right instincts, and they have to have the right attitude, and you're not going to get that just by jumping a big fence.
I probably could sit here for another half an hour or more, and there would still be some things to ask you, William. And I must say, I have to extend an absolute and sincere thanks to you for your time. And I also want to thank John Slazenger, the videographer, for his steady hand and capturing the images that allowed us to bring the subject to life. So a big shout out there to John. And I'd like to extend my thanks also to viewers here this evening for joining us, for getting involved, staying with us, and there's been a super attendance here this evening. The next Let's Talk Equine is on Tuesday, July the 6th. Same time, same place, and my guests on that occasion will be Victoria Toyton and Joe Burke. Until then, I must say, William, the Zoom, it finishes very quickly, and when I press the button, it is goodbye. But until the next time, everybody, thank you very much, and good night for now.
Thank you, Wendy.